Hello, this is What Are Cells in 10 minutes or less with Miss Humphries. So on Monday we learned about what cells are and how many different categories we have or categories we have depending on how many cells you have. So our warm up for the day was rate these fries. We all agree Chick-fil-A is the best. With Checkers coming in a close second. Here is our agenda for the day, and we did do a Nearpod. So I'm going to hop over to our Nearpod. And we are in a student-paced session. So if you want to join this Nearpod, it is part of our participation grade. Here is your student code. You're just going to go to Nearpod, X as in X-ray, E as in Edward, 8 as in 1 less than 9, R as in rabbit, and A as in apple. You can go to Nearpod and join that session. So I am going to go here to share, and I'm just going to go to this link so I can join us as a student session. And this is what it will look like for you guys. And I am just going to go ahead and look at our opening slide. And if we remember from class, the reason that we were looking at this was to make observations. So some of the observations we made were that there are these holes, that there's kind of like a hair on them. It looks similar to the core of the Earth. We talked about that. And we noticed that we have all of these different shapes and colors. And because they look different, they must do different things. So that was a really great conclusion that we made. That was a good inference that we made based off our observation. And this is just where we put our observations for that day. Now, next we defined what a cell is. We just looked at a cell. Then we had to define what a cell is. So we talked about how it is the basic unit of life. Now we all, some of us have, and we talked about, have heard about atoms and particles and molecules, and those make up everything that is not alive, remember? But living is made of cells. So we are made of cells. Our phones are made of atoms and particles. So we have to be able to need water and survive on nutrients. So if something does not need water or nutrients, it is not alive. Okay, so we talked about the 3 different categories: bacteria, plants, and animals. And we now know those as prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but not yet, spoiler. All right, then we guessed which one are cells, and we know it's that adorable doggo and that beautiful fall leaves. And then we touched quickly on cell theory. Now, we just said all living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life, just like an atom makes up non-living things, cells make up living things, the basic unit of life. But lastly, we talked about how all cells come from pre-existing cells. Now, these cells already existed. So, my skin cannot just create a cell. Another cell has to remake itself. And we're going to talk about that in mitosis, meiosis. Think about it as your grandparents had to have your parents had to have you. All right, it had to come from something that was already here. You did not just spontaneously appear. That would be so cool, but you didn't. You were made from something else. So think about it as a family tree of cells. All right, and we focused on the left side of this slide. We did not really discuss the right because that's our next video. But here on the left side, we discussed that uni, similar to unicorn or unicycle, means one. And cellular means cell. So unicellular means one cell or single-celled organisms. We agreed that you can have one cell and be alive. Some examples we talked about were bacteria and yeast. And think about a multiplex, multiverse. Multi means many. Cellular cell, many cells. And we understand that we are multicellular. And what's cool about multicellular organisms is that each cell in their body has a very specific task. If you think about it, our skin cells work differently than our stomach cells, that work differently than our liver cells, which work differently than our brain cells. They all have specific tasks. So specialized. Specialized is our keyword there for multicellular. Specialized. All right. Our examples for a unicellular organism is yeast and bacteria, and multicellular was plants and animals. All right, and I say bacteria and yeast. Yeast is a bacteria. It's a positive, healthy bacteria, and we know there are good bacterias. I already played this game, spoiler alert, so I won. But the questions were, and let's see if I can play again. Oh no, it's just gonna tell me I won. That was awful. It's just gonna tell me I won. So our questions were if it has one cell, it's unicellular. If it has multiple cells, it's multicellular. All cells come from other cells. And lastly, cells are the basic unit of life. And for something to be living, it has to have a cell. Our breakout room was just this really fun activity, and I love Discovery Ed simulation. So what we're looking at here is different kinds of cells that we just discussed. So you can go ahead and play around with a simulation of single-celled organisms, plants, and animals. So just like we talked about today, bacteria, animals, and plants. So a cell is the smallest part of a living life. We learned that. Some living things like bacteria are made up of one cell. What do we call that? C, unicellular. Remember, Dora. Plants, animals, and humans are very different kinds of cells. Each cell has a job to do. Remember, specialization. That's our key word. And cells are too small to be seen without a microscope, so we got to play with what's under my microscope today, Wednesday. What does the cell look like? And then we can look through that microscope and find out. So here are our microscopic images. And remember, we talked about why does a human skin cell look different from its blood cell, which looks different from its muscle cell. And remember, you're all geniuses and told me right off the bat that because they have different jobs, they look different. They have different parts because they do different things. And same thing with plants. We see that those look different than animal cells because they do different things. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Cells have specialization. You can have one or multiple, and they're the basis of all living things. Look at that, 7 minutes.